last week we discussed love, dating, sex, relationships, marriage, and all the psychological aspects that come with that, and how we can possibly beat our genes to find happiness in this regard. So this week we got a lot of good comments from last week's episode, and we'll jump into some questions in a moment. But I wanted to go over a movie I watched a long time ago. This is, again, last week we were talking about Billy Crystal and Robert De Niro. But there was another movie with Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan called When Harry Met Sally. And this kind of leads us off into this whole love, dating, sex, relationships. Men and women are always trying to find sex. They're trying to be friends. They're trying to connect in a certain way. And in this movie, Harry, who's Billy Crystal's character, tells Sally that it's not possible for men and women to be friends. So let's stand here for a second.
Harry, we are just going to be friends, okay?
Great, friends. Thanks. You realize, of course, that we could never be friends.
Why not?
What I'm saying is, and this is not a come on in any way, shape, or form, is that men and women can't be friends because the sex part always gets in the way.
That's not true. I have a number of men friends, and there is no sex involved.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do.
You only think you do.
You're saying I'm having sex with these men without my knowledge?
No, what I'm saying is they all want to have sex with you.
They do not.
You too.
They do not.
You too.
How do you know?
Because no man can be friends with a woman that he finds attractive. He always wants to have sex with her.
So you're saying that a man can be friends with a woman he finds unattractive?
No, you pretty much want to nail him too.
What if they don't want to have sex with you?
Doesn't matter, because the sex thing is already out there, so the friendship is ultimately doomed, and that is the end of the story.
Well, I guess we're not going to be friends then.
Guess not.
Too bad. You were the only person that I knew in New York.
What are your thoughts, Dr. Lisle?
That's a very sweet scene. It is not true, of course, but it makes for a great illustration of the differences between men and women, and so in that way, it's a priceless scene. We could talk more about this particular movie if people have seen it. It's a classic, and but actually, in my view, When Harry Met Sally is one of the great tragedies in romantic cinema. It's not recognized as such because the chicks do not understand that it is a tragedy. But When Harry Met Sally is in fact a tragedy because Harry is not into Sally, and he marries her out of friendship, which is a disaster. But at any rate, we can come back to that later on.
Well, tell us more because last week we talked a little bit about how men can actually be pressured into marriage by females, and when in fact they may not actually ever want to be in a marriage, and so this can be a disaster for both parties.
Yeah, that was the story of this relationship. Was that as Harry and Sally, Harry was maybe interested in her very early, but then he really wasn't after they got to know each other, and so they were friends. And then they go about their separate ways. And then she has a breakup with this tall, handsome guy played by Gerald Ford's son. And at any rate, so she breaks up with him, and he was the guy who was supposed to be the center of her life, and that she was going to have kids with and get married, but didn't happen. And so he breaks up with her, and then in the aftermath of that breakup, Sally turns to Harry, and essentially, in a pitiful process, sort of comes on to Harry, and they sleep together. And Harry wasn't really into it. He did it just because, in effect, it was a friendship support process that takes place, and then she, for whatever reasons, she finds Harry acceptable enough, and that not being necessarily that high of a priority for her, and he then, because they are such good friends, he basically gets boxed into this relationship. So it is a horrendous story, because the notion is that this actually fits female psychology in a way that it does not fit male psychology. The longer that a female knows a male, the longer she knows him, the more likely it is that she will sleep with him. And the reason is that females value safety very, very highly in sexual situations. They value people that are familiar, that are known, that they know their character, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, they're designed by nature to place great value on stability and knowledge of the person, whereas males do not have that situation, and for the very reason that the male cannot be effectively raped by a female. His reproductive resources cannot be wrested from him by a female by force. Neither can a female take advantage of him and then abandon him. These are all tremendous issues if you're a female of our species, and so as a result, in other species this isn't an issue, but in our species, females are designed by nature to desperately try to get a hold of male resources in addition to the male's DNA. And so as a result, they value someone who is sticking around, who is known to their social circle, and whose behavior is known. In this case, Harry is a successful young lawyer, and therefore he's got good, solid money. He's never been unemployed. There's never been any issue. He's a highly educated, six-figure, solid guy. And so that winds up with Sally in her mid-30s with her biological clock ticking, which they make a significant issue out of. She actually, essentially in the aftermath of a breakup, she says, "What the hell? I'll take Harry." And Harry was never into her, not since their perhaps very initial meeting before he knew who she was, and is not attracted to her. They had been friends for years, and they have been not attracted. She has not been coming on to her. And men do not have a situation where they are not interested in some woman for years and years and then suddenly become interested. This is not characteristic of male psychology. If a female meets criteria in terms of sexual attractiveness, if she does not meet criteria, she does not raise in sexual esteem with knowledge of her character. That is not true for males. Males can absolutely rise in terms of their sexual acceptability as women get to know who it is that they are and feel safer. So from the standpoint of a female watching this movie, the movie makes complete sense to females because, after all, Harry, if he's a good guy, and of course he really loves her, and so of course she's pretty enough because she's prettier than he is. So, yeah, of course, all it is his commitment phobia that he has to get over, and that he'll be fine and he'll be very happy with Sally. Well, this is entirely bullshit. The truth of the matter is that Harry has never been interested in Sally. He is not sexually attracted to Sally. He loves Sally as a friend, and a male is not, quote, sexually attracted to some female and then not know it, or she is not acceptable and him not know it. This is not how males work. So Sally does not become acceptable over time as they get to know each other better. She is firmly in the non-sexually interesting but very sweet friend location in his mind. And he gets boxed into this thing.
I will be sure to not have my sisters and my mother listen to this part of the show because they absolutely adored that movie. And me and my dad kind of just said, "Well, I guess they want to watch it, so we'll watch it too."
Right, and you'll find that females, this resonates with female psychology, but they have no intuition about male psychology here. When Harry Met Sally is an American tragedy, and that tragedy takes place whenever some guy gets cornered into a relationship by very subtle social pressure, and then winds up being married. One of my very earliest experiences clinically was with it was at the Family Institute at the University of Virginia, where they did family psychotherapy, and the therapist there was a man by the name of Dr. David Waters, known to be very assertive and full of guts and dramatic and all this sort of stuff. So I was very interested to take this special graduate seminar and watch him work. It was one of the rare times when I give Dr. Waters credit. It's one of the rare times when you actually got to see a psychotherapist actually work, because usually they hide behind textbooks and you never know how they actually work. So we got to watch Dr. Waters work with a couple, and that couple was a woman probably in her mid to late 30s, and she was divorced and had a daughter that was about 6, maybe about 6. And so she was a single mom and might have had a son. I can't remember, but I don't think so. I think she just had about a 6-year-old daughter. And I think there was a second kid. So anyway, they meet this guy meets, I don't know if they're church, and this guy's a really nice guy. And I remember watching the therapy sessions where it's coming on Christmas, and the guy says, people shouldn't get their hopes up, because there was definite pressure in the wind about that they should get married because they were living together. And what transpired was interesting. Dr. Waters was following the standard sort of gutless line that there was something not right about this guy, that there was some sexual issues, because he didn't seem to be very interested in her, and yet he eventually, over the last 3 or 4 months that we observed these sessions, they did get married, but then it was in trouble, and the wife was in there sort of complaining and trying to drag him into therapy about this, and it was obvious to me what the truth was. This guy was not into this woman. And yet Dr. Waters was not seeing the handwriting on the wall. It was so obvious. There was nothing at all about this situation where this guy was in any way deviant, odd, or anything else. This was just a nice guy who met this lady at church, was probably a little bit attracted to her at the beginning. Then his kid, his little daughter, 6-year-old daughter, just loved this guy because he was just a sweet man. And so he got connected into this family as a member of the coalition and as a member of this church situation. And then they get known as a couple, and then he couldn't get out. And that was an early tragedy that I witnessed, and nobody stood up for this guy and gave him the words or the assertiveness to support what was obviously taking place.
Okay, so on this same line, we got a lot of comments from the last episode and a lot of different questions from a lot of different people. So
Sure.
In this line of thinking, let's just get right to it. And there's people out there that post comments saying that the hookup culture nowadays and this concept of hypergamy, do you think that it will lead to less marriages or fewer long-term relationships?
Well, I think that what you're seeing is we've talked about this before, that you're seeing a mega trend that is taking place now that began as follows. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but 10,000 years ago we were hunter-gatherers, and the males were looked by females as primarily. What was primarily important was how sexually attractive the male was. And then secondarily, he was a member of the village where he could bring protection, village protection, as well as it was his job to hunt. So there was some protection and provisioning qualities to the male, but remember what was not there. There was not expectation that the male would bring wealth, per se, or that the male would stick around for 15 or 20 years and raise a child. That was not expected. That was not part of the village deal. And so if a relationship would last for a few years, that would be a lot. And if a male would stick around for 4 or 5 years and be with a female through the early first few years of his child's life, that would be pretty substantial stick-to-itiveness, and that would have been consistent with the natural history of our species. Now, with the dawn of agriculture and eventually with the importance of wealth and passing on wealth to offspring, suddenly it becomes very important to get as much wealth as you can, provisioning on top of children's heads for their whole lifetime. And so the males sticking around longer and rules about finances and so on and so forth basically force males and females both into marriage, which marriage now evolves spontaneously out of human culture, not because it's part of human natural history, but it's actually a response to wealth. Without wealth, you're not going to have marriage. You're going to have relationships in this particular species that are going to have a phenomenon known as love, where they are connected up and interested in each other for long periods of time, months or years. But you're not going to have this long-term knockdown monogamous process that has been the ideal for the last 10,000 years as instituted by church and law. Those are totally unnatural processes, and so they've been necessary to protect the precarious financial position of illegitimate children or children without a father's protection. So as a result, now in cultures where women are becoming successful enough financially that their children will not take a big hit, that their children, that they can actually support their children well, you now are going to find that women are not going to be nearly as interested in being married indefinitely, and the men certainly are not. And so you are watching now a phenomenon, what you call the hookup culture, is actually a culture that with birth control, women are now able to exercise sexual choice behind their lust circuits in a way that they always have, but not to the extent that they're able to do so now. And so we know from sociological data that goes back 100 years into the early 20th century, where we've collected data, in the 1920s and 1930s on human beings and preferences and mating behavior. We know that in the 1920s, the females did not rate a male's looks as highly important when it came to a marriage partner. What they looked at, what was important was their prospects economically. That is vastly less true today. Okay, so what you've seen over the last 80 or 90 years is you've seen a slow but steady decline in the importance of the male's financial circumstances, even though they remain important. They do not have nearly the power now to fix ugly looks that they did 80 years ago. And so females are now responding much more like the Stone Age females, where the male provisioning is somewhat important, but what becomes very important to them is their sexual excitement about the male, and the sexual excitement is being driven by their estimations of their gene quality or their handsomeness.
And so does the amount of sexual partners that we have over our lifetime, does that affect future happiness, either for both men and for women?
Well, actually, there are big individual differences between the sexes on this, and there's also large individual differences within the sexes on this. So if you look at typical males, a typical male would like to have, I think it's about 25 or 30 sexual partners in their lifetime. In other words, they just have that sense that that's about as much novelty, and they feel like they will have covered the ground if that's about as far as they got. Females, it's much less. It's on the order of 10, I think, or so. So you're seeing that as you would expect, males would be much more interested in novelty and variety, and females would be significantly less so. And I think that and females are certainly in a position to realize sexual novelty a hell of a lot more than males are. because they're the controlling factor on sexual activity. And so you're going to find people today are going to be more satisfied in that area of their life than they have been in the past, several centuries, just because of birth control and because of the lack of tragedy associated with unwanted pregnancy. You now have, and therefore women. It used to be the case that the average number of sexual partners that a woman went to her grave with was 3. That was the standard, very typical number was 3 with just a few on each side of that was standard. So
does that include pool boys?
What's that?
Does that include pool boys?
Includes the pool boys. So that would have been true. This is sort of 1950s, even 1960s generation females. So now that's going to be different. So I'm not sure what the current numbers are, but they have risen dramatically in the last 20 or 30 years. And so women people are able to essentially experience their more of the novelty that would have been typical in Stone Age, and so they feel like there's less likely that they have missed out as much as they would have felt in 1950. But that aspect is still there, and the gravity of marriage and the pressure societal pressure of long-term committed relationships still remains a fairly oppressive force in human affairs.
Okay, so this is actually it kind of brings me to one of the comments that came in from last episode is how much does culture influence this sexual market and the dating game and marriage? For example, in Eastern cultures, they still have a relatively strong marriage system in place. Whereas in Western cultures, it may not be as strong. And then does religion or lack of religion play any role in this?
Certainly. I mean, these things, what you're seeing is religion's influence in this, would have arisen at the beginning of agrarian society. So this is all about protecting both males and females' genetic interests. So there are cultures around the world, very backwards cultures, that are down on birth control, and so this is obviously a whole other episode. But I mean, these people remain by the millions in the United States today. So there's a bizarre human fascination with the idea of somehow maximizing gene reproduction. I mean, it's just astounding that this is how people think. But the truth of the matter is that when you're going to have situations where you're going to have children are expensive. They are biologically expensive creatures, for human beings are, and they are expensive in the modern environment. And so, and particularly in more sort of primitive cultures with primitive economic systems and the inability of women to make a decent living, there's just no way you can responsibly be a female and be having children out of wedlock. This is not going to be happening. So these sexual events are going to be very carefully monitored and planned, and people are going to be bullied. And this is what we call, quote, a stronger religious force, whether it's in the United States or elsewhere. What you're really seeing is, there's going to be multiple reasons for this, and we could add a bunch of sociological, equations into this. But the bottom line is that you see a tremendous amount of intimidation and pressure, as well as real live financial problems associated with having children that result in people, quote, being in stronger marriages, which means that people are much less happy.
Okay, and then so in those cultures, why is it that promiscuity in females tends to be looked down upon, whereas promiscuity in males tends to be like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's just the way it is?
Yeah, I think that what you're seeing, quote, when you say, quote, look down upon, you're seeing things from the male point of view. Mm-hmm. And these are male-dominated cultures, male-dominated religions, and you are seeing essentially the following process, that in essence, this is what's taking place. Unattractive, relatively unattractive males with resources are in power. And as a result, what they can do is that they can essentially outcompete handsomer males that may be younger without resources in order to get more attractive wives. Those attractive wives need to be under a tremendous amount of intimidation to stop those females from being impregnated by their attractive possible mates, young men who may be very, very interested in them, and likewise. And so as a result, we put a bunch of clothing draping all over the females and make them unable to show themselves, and we will stone them if they're caught, sleeping with anybody that they're not supposed to, and so on and so forth. I mean, these are now exaggerated versions of what you would see in a lot of sort of oppressive subcultures within the United States. What you're seeing is that by virtue of an economically dependent and essentially boxed in female, the females are boxed in to mating choices and mating situations that they're really not very happy with, and as a result, they have to be intimidated, they have to be controlled as much as possible, and of course, quote, female promiscuity is looked down upon, because if the wealthy male is now turns out that he's raising somebody else's kid, that is a biological disaster for him. So there's going to be tremendous force there. There would be plenty of criticism for the male oppression in this situation if a female could raise her voice. But since she's not allowed to raise her voice and has no access and ability to do so, you don't hear those voices. The only voices you hear are from the dominant members of that culture.
I mean, it makes sense when it comes to those oppressive cultures. And of course, I live in a liberal state, and so I'm sure it can't compare to some of the more extreme examples of oppressive societies. But in my experience, all of the shame for promiscuity and the experience of my friends has come from women. Women are far more likely to shame other women for being promiscuous, yes. At least in my experience, yes. And the experience of my friends.
There's no question that that's true. So there's also this is all, when you start to realize how many different mating agendas and people's agendas there are, this gets to be very, very complicated game theory. So it's not super complicated, but just complicated enough to be tricky. And so what I was talking about when I talked about male-dominated cultures and males dominating the females' reproductive equipment and their lives, that is all very, very true. However, it is also the case that women are very nervous about other women being promiscuous, and the reason that's true is because promiscuity in women essentially destabilizes the village. So this means that women in effect have to work as a low-grade conspiracy, where they essentially are trying to pressure each other into pair bond behavior if they can, and so they're going to try to disturb or hurt the reputations of other females if other females are sexual competitors. So you're not going to see, for example, an 8 female criticizing a 5 female for being promiscuous. Not very likely. But you will see a 5 female criticizing an 8 female for being promiscuous, whether she is or not. And the reason is that if it's a gamble to try to reduce the quote promiscuous female sexual attractiveness, possibly to any mates that are say less attractive female would be interested in. Now they wouldn't have to be less attractive. So if you can think in principle about 2 females who are 8s that are competing for pretty well the same males in a mating pool, it would be a risky but potentially useful strategy to if you are let's suppose that you are the brunette female and the other one is a blonde, then you may want to criticize the blonde behind her back about being promiscuous in order to reduce the blonde's mating cachet as a pair bond target for the males that you are interested in. The problem is that you will increase the blonde's mate value to males in terms of a casual mating strategy target. And so, and this can be a problem because casual mating can very often turn into pair bonds. So that often happens just that way. So as a result, this is a risky strategy, but it is definitely a strategy that appears to have been evolutionarily stable. In other words, it appears to be a very useful strategy in terms of its net effect for females to criticize other females who are sexually attractive and try to hit them at the level of character to try to reduce their overall mate value to the males. So this is, you will see part and parcel of this behavior in the Middle East, where there's some very unattractive females who have no problem wearing a burqa, okay? And it's like, look, we all need to be wearing these things, so nobody gets to show off their sexual attractiveness, okay? So this is part of the way that bizarre-looking, pretty brutal social practices can become entrenched in systems, because all it takes is enough of a majority of the power with enough complicit behavior on the part of both sexes, and now we wind up into a situation where a certain subset of people can be under a hell of a lot of pressure and oppression.
Now, okay, so why does promiscuity disturb the village? This is actually, I'm actually fairly curious.
Yes. Well, just think about 10 women and 10 men in a village, and they're all pair bonded. And let's suppose that the third most attractive female out of this. So we got 10, 9, 8. So we got the eight female who's bonded to the 8 male has a little wild streak. So she's promiscuous. So she's willing to sleep behind his back. Okay. The problem is that if she does this, this will potentially destabilize the whole village, because now the people that she's going to be most interested in are going to be the Mr. 9 and Mr. 10, the 2 most attractive males. And so as a result, if she starts sleeping with Mr. 9, then there are many conflicts that have just been stoked. So Mr. 9 is now sleeping with his 9 wife, but he's also sleeping with the 8 chippy on the side. This puts him in direct conflict of interest with the man who is an 8. It also puts her in vicious competition. The 8 female is now in competition with the 9. So now
for resources, is it?
No, they're actually in competition. Yeah, ultimately they're in competition for Mr. 9's pair bond affections. So as a result, this is now disturbing that pair bond dramatically, and so you now have a whole host of problems, and with the whole village watching, you now have a destabilized situation. People are going to take sides. There's going to be social pressure brought to bear, etc. So this is, these 2 guys could wind up so pissed off at each other that they have to break up the village. And so this is anybody that's ever hung around or even heard of or read any stories of a band, this is what goes on all the time in a band. So you got 5 guys and 5 girlfriends, and pretty soon you're going to have trouble. And this is what goes down in situations like that. So there's a lot of pressure. The females can essentially act as a little group of hens to try to put a lot of pressure on a promiscuous female to get her act together, in essence, to raise the price of the promiscuous behavior by potentially being shunned by the group. That makes that behavior very expensive for that female and therefore discourages it.
So is a person who sleeps with many people, like many one-night stands, are they running after social validation, or is that just a pop psychology, manipulation tactic used to shun the person?
Yeah, I don't even know what the hell that means. Describe to me what anybody means by social validation.
Well, so this wasn't my question. This was one of the questions posed on the comment section, but I read through it, and basically the theory, according to this particular user and this particular forum, was that people who sleep with several people are doing it just to get some social validation, to get the feel good words, and to be honest, I don't really know, but that they sleep around to get the nice words and all that.
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, there's quite a few different motivations for sexual behavior. The primarily, by far, the primary reason is that it's the most heavily rewarded behavior in nature behind the pleasure circuits, so that it can, because you need to do those literally do those movements in order to reproduce DNA. So if you want to know why people have sex, it's because they like it. Okay, just the way all other animals do. So a person that sleeps with a lot of people, you're going to look at that question from 2 different angles, whether you're looking at it from the female angle or from the male angle. If you're a male and you're sleeping with a lot of people, then this is if the females are attractive enough to you and you're able to have sex with a whole bunch of them, then you are what's known in nature as a successful male, for God's sakes. So you aren't doing this for social validation. You're doing this because this is behavior that took place for the last several million years in our lineage, and the males that walk the earth today are almost entirely descendants of males who were very successful at pulling exactly this problem off. Okay? So that is absurd to look at this as social validation. You need to look at it as the natural novelty-seeking drive of a male who's attempting to, in principle, and I say in principle because he's not consciously trying to do this today, but in principle, his behavior is simply directed at impregnating large numbers of females. Like that's all he's up to, and that's all he should be up to according to his biology. So I don't see anything. The only males that I've seen that pulled this off were uniformly highly attractive males.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Wilt Chamberlain.
yeah, exactly. In other words, very attractive males, charismatic males, etc., that were able to pull this off. So these are not disgusting people. These are people that are the envy of their peers, for God's sakes.
And what about women?
Yeah, women is a different issue. So women can be occasionally can be very promiscuous. It's not typical of the female of our species, but it is true for some of them. And if you think about this, remember that most males that reproduce, very few males are extremely successful in terms of a promiscuous behavior pattern. In other words, they just can't pull it off. So a lot of males evolved a strategy. The male of the species evolved a strategy that we're going to call a love strategy, where they are willing to stick around with one and hang out with her for a number of years and be fascinated with her little offspring that kind of look like him, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's a true love strategy that evolved in our species alongside what was originally simply nothing other than raw lust casual mating strategy. Now, you have to remember that humans are going to differ considerably, not just by their circumstances, but also by their natural biology. So, for example, there are going to be males and females that are far more pair bond strategy oriented than other males and females. And so if you can imagine a male who happens to be a wild, crazy, casual mating strategy monster, and let's just for sake of argument, let's say that he's also attractive enough and resourceful enough that he's able to live out this strategy and be perfectly effective, and throughout the course of his life he's sleeping with half a dozen or so people a year. So by the time he's 40, he has slept with over 100 women in his life, and he's going to sleep with another 50 or 100 before he's done. Now, think about the psychology of that man. He's not that much of a pair bonder. He doesn't get that close and that tight. He doesn't care that much about the female's feelings. In other words, he's willing to lie to them to get him into bed and then leave him after he's done. And so now think about those genes of that personality happen to wind up in a daughter of his along the way. So let's say he's got 50 children and 25 of them are girls. Well, those girls, some of them are going to be likely to be very much like him. That they are going to be novelty seeking as hell with respect to sexuality, and that they are not going to be that pair bond connection oriented. And as a result, they may feel some love circuits in there, just like our hardcore male does, but they can still be fascinated enough with casual sex that they can be very promiscuous, and they're not seeking social validation or anything else. They too are seeking are actually seeking something else that we see in which is that by making, let's suppose our girl is an 8 and she's got this sort of casual mating strategy psychology. It's going to turn out that if she follows her lust cues or her lust responses, then what will happen is this will mean that she will sleep with a great many people, but the people that she's going to sleep with are very likely to be sexier than she is, because she is able to hit up the 9s and the 10s males, who and by coming on to them and showing that she's going to be very easy, that she is not needing a love relationship, she doesn't even need 3 dates. She's flirting with them right off the bat and giving them cues that she'd sleep with them immediately. Now, what's happening there is that she is sleeping up and not asking for any resources, which means she's making it a very inexpensive foray for the male. And if the male is somewhat casual mating strategy oriented and he's willing to take her up on it, then that means that most of the sperm that winds up inside of that female during her mating career are going to be fancier, more sexy sperm than the eggs that she's bringing. And as a result, any offspring that would come about from living a strategy like this would tend to be sexy offspring, sexier than she is herself. And so this is why it is that some females are going to have this kind of behavior. You do not typically see females have this kind of behavior and sleep down. That is not characteristic of female mating strategy.
Now, let's take this example a little further. And by the way, if there's anybody who wants to call in for some comments, we've got 657 is the phone number, 657-383-0751. Again, the number is 657-383-0751. Okay, so let's say now this woman is having a great time in her 20s and even in her mid-20s and maybe even in her late 20s. And then 30 years old hits, and she's starting to think, she's got that biological clock coming where now she's thinking, oh, geez, if I'm going to have kids, now's the time to do it. Does the fact that she has now had partners in the past that were all 9s and 10s, will that prevent her from being happy dating a man who now who's going to want to bond with her?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I think that is the answer to that is very possibly yes. In other words, you will see that, and I have certainly seen in my practice, situations where females that do not understand this about their own psychology, they don't know what the hell they're doing. They're just animals that are acting essentially on impulse. I mean, they have thoughts about it, and they talk with their friends, and they may even talk to their psychologist, but nobody knows what the hell's going on. That female does not know that she has a casual mating strategy streak, and that as a result, what she has done is she has availed herself of 40 highly attractive males that are more attractive than she is, and because of all the positive feedback that she's gotten from them, that they've been eager to get into her pants, she has effectively got herself over-calibrated. And now the truth is that although if she's an 8 and the 9s and 10s males are very eager to sleep with her, but not a single one of them has been interested in pair bonding with her. And not only that, 8s are not interested in pair bonding with her either, because males are trying to sleep up when it comes to pair bonding. And females are essentially, they're not obliged to sleep down, but that is very typical. That is the typical case in our species. And so as a result of that, her real market is the 7. And so but that 7 is going to could leave her very flat. So I do believe that raises a challenge for females, and so be it. The truth of the matter is that these are bizarre problems that you are now concocting in the modern environment in a world that is inconsistent with the natural history of our species. A female with that psychology, with enough novelty seeking in her psychology, and enough willingness to engage in sexual behavior with a minimum of psychological and material investment by males, is essentially someone who would have been playing what we call a sexy son strategy or sexy son hypothesis, that her offspring would have been very sexually attractive, more sexually attractive than herself, because her mates would have been more attractive than her, because they would have been sleeping down, and she would have been a single mom. And that's how that game plays. And that is not the most typical strategy for the human female, but is absolutely a common variant of female sexual psychology. And yeah, I think it's tough. I think it's a tough one.
Okay, so the beat the genes here is if you're put into this situation, kind of understand what's happening there.
Yes, I think that it is the case that females over time will tend to increase their attraction to males who are of good character and are resourceful. And so, but the female has, general female, particularly a casual mating strategy oriented female, has very little intuition about this because she may have never had that experience. And when people have told her, hey, you should go out with Horace, he's a good guy, and she's gone out with him dutifully because she had a bunch of friends and her mother had hooked her up or something, and she went out with him 3 times and nothing happened. And she says, see, that doesn't work. It's just bullshit. Okay? I really like Nick, the guy with the tattoo and the earring, and sorry, that's just how it is. And so the bottom line is she could easily be convinced and unaware of a potential that resides inside of her nervous system to increase her feelings of attraction for a male who is very interested in her but does not immediately strike her as sexy. That potential probably exists in her, but it's not going to be that easy for her to find it. Not nearly as easy it is for a typical female.
And will she always kind of pine after that, musician star type of guy? Even if she's with the boring Horace?
It depends upon how, not necessarily at all. It depends upon what that bonding looks like, what the oxytocin is in that relationship, etc. So she may find for herself the ability to hit a good groove, But what I'm saying is that there's a good chance she'll never find it because she doesn't know where to look.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Now onto this whole like rock star. While we're on this topic, one of the comments was, "Why are there no male groupies?" I don't know if this is true or not, but I mean, I would think that there are way more female groupies than male groupies.
Yes.
What's the cause of this?
Well, the truth of the matter is that the females are chasing extraordinary male DNA, the DNA that was required to fight their way to the top of the dominance hierarchy, as difficult as, for example, being a musician. So that is quite a test of fitness. And so a male that is, these are essentially sexual attractiveness displays. They are in our species. There are several displays that are typical: singing, dancing, athletics, and beauty, and houses, or just material wealth. These are the biggest, some of the main fitness indicators that we display. But males are not particularly interested in females who fight their way to the top of dominance hierarchies. They don't give a shit, okay? Males just want to know how good you look. So if you're a female rock and roller who is an 8, and there is some girl that's sitting in the side of the show there that's a 9. The guy in the audience is a hell of a lot more interested in the 9 that is in the audience than he is in the 8 that's on the stage. He couldn't care less about the 8's magnificent singing abilities or her tenacity to climb dominance hierarchies. It is not an attractive fitness indicator for males to observe this, whereas that is not the same case on the other side. Remember also, if there are males oohing and awing in the audience over a female, this is not particularly attractive to other males, that other males would find somebody attractive and that they would be interested in them for casual mating, or that a female on the other side of this would look like she was interested in casual mating, because that would just mean that you were going to there was no way to pair bond with that female, and your odds of getting there are extremely remote to have sex with her, because she's going to be very, very selective, and et cetera. So this is all a fiasco, and males just don't give a damn. Whereas on the other side, the flip side, females they could pass on this extraordinary sexual attractiveness that a male rock star has achieved, and that rock star could impregnate her and a whole lot of other women this year. And if she has a little son that is similar to that rock star, then that son may dominate the mating arena of his social future. And so there is no great profit in women climbing dominance hierarchies, but there is tremendous profit in males climbing dominance hierarchies. We as males are already attuned. Remember, we do not seek resources from females as males. We do not. Females seek resources from males. This is a tremendous difference, okay? So as a result, a male who has fought his way to the top of the dominance hierarchy is a male who is indicating capability at resource acquisition. Whereas a female that fights her way to the top of the dominance hierarchy, I don't care. I'm not looking to her for resources. My job is to look at her body and her face and to observe whether or not she is an idealized physical specimen. And to the extent that she is less than perfect, I'm taking away points. And so I couldn't care less whether she's the president of IBM, or she's the president of the United States, or she's anything else under the sun and any other achievement. It's not relevant. What's relevant is her waist-hips ratio and how pretty she is, and whether or not she's got a beautiful smile with white teeth. Sorry, but that's just how it is.
And that's inside the male psychology. I read I read something a while ago that said that it was basically comparing female happiness compared to how much hierarchy they've climbed in life, i.e., is a medical doctor female, or is a CEO who's a female going to be happier because she's climbed up that ladder? And it actually said no. The higher she climbs, the less happy she's going to be, because she's going to be more selective with mates who can, there's going to be a lot fewer CEOs who are going to be able to, she's going to be able to look up at.
Right. Yeah, that's, I don't, this is just the issue is that our achievements inside, who we are inside, our intelligence or our accomplishments and so on and so forth, what these do is that they don't typically make us a lot more sexually attractive. What they do is they assign us to mating tiers. And so females are, in particular, their mate value is overwhelmingly determined by their physical appearance, and the rest of it, their intelligence or their accomplishments, assigns them to people of similar characteristics. It does not elevate their sexual attraction.
Oop, are you there?
Yep. No, I'm there.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this is somewhat different for males, not hugely, but somewhat. So it's a little bit sloppier on the male end because females are looking for resources, so they are willing to trade looks for resources. Males are never willing to trade resources for looks. In other words, to trade the same way. A male does not find an accomplished female more sexually attractive. It doesn't happen.
So, to the extent that women want to accomplish things, they should accomplish them because it's fulfilling, it's desirable, they want to do it, rather than it's going to make them more attractive.
Yeah, it's not going to make them more attractive at all.
Mm-hmm.
All it's going to do is mark them for a catchment of males. So that's what you're doing. That's what that's about. And I think that women should achieve things and try to achieve financial independence, essentially, because you want to be in a position of power throughout the course of your life with respect to your sexual choice. So if you wind up married and have a couple of kids and then don't want to be married, then you want to be in a position where you are not dependent. And so it's very important logistically for women to be accomplished, but it does not increase their sexual attractiveness. Make less money and be more fit. That's a much better strategy for females who are trying to find mates that they find attractive to find them attractive.